I stood at the pulpit and stared at the closed casket while the entire church waited for me to speak. The program called it a tribute from the devoted wife. Devoted. The word tasted like ash. Half the people in those pews believed Aaron's lies, that I was a thief, a fraud, a woman who had completely lost her mind. His mother sat in the front row with her jaw tight and her eyes full of hate. She had worn that same expression the day Aaron stood in court and told a judge I was dangerous. But I was the one they had asked to speak, because Aaron's final legal request had named me, and only me, to read his final statement aloud. I unfolded the paper slowly. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is my late husband's final written statement." The room leaned in. I had barely read 3 sentences before the pastor stepped forward with his hand raised. His face was pale. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "The will contains a clause. Public disclosure isn't permitted." I looked at him calmly. "That's the version he showed you," I said. "I have the real one. My name is Amelia Hartwell. To understand how I ended up at that pulpit, you have to go back 18 months, to the Tuesday morning Aaron destroyed my life. I had built Hartwell Creative from a single rented office. 6 years of careful work. My grandmother's inheritance had funded the early stages. By the time I married Aaron, the company had 12 employees and 3 major contracts. Aaron had walked into my life at a charity dinner. He was charming and warm in a way that felt almost too perfect. Within 8 months we were married. The morning everything ended, I walked into my office and found 2 police officers waiting at my desk. Aaron stood near the window, trembling and red-eyed, performing the part of a man watching his world collapse. "I tried to stop her," he told the officers, his voice cracking with practiced sorrow. Handcuffs clicked around my wrists. My employees lined the hallway as they walked me out. I kept my eyes forward and did not cry. But in the police car, something in the documents they handed me made me go completely still. The officer handed me an evidence folder. My attorney had requested early access. I flipped through the pages steadily until I stopped cold. On the transfer authorization form at the bottom of the page was a signature. Careful looping letters. A name I had grown up reading on birthday cards and Christmas envelopes. My grandmother's handwriting. Her full name exactly as she always signed it. She had been dead for 3 years. Someone had forged her signature, and done it carefully enough to pass a bank officer and satisfy a detective. At the station, the detective assigned to my case was named Ward. He didn't look like someone conducting an investigation. He looked like someone waiting for a result he already expected. He sat across from me without opening his notepad. "Your husband contacted us 3 weeks ago," Ward said flatly. "For the record, he has already filed for divorce." I said nothing. But inside, something cold and precise had just clicked into place. Aaron had not acted in panic. He had been planning this for a very long time. Harper bailed me out 6 hours later. She didn't ask questions in the car. She just drove. Inside her apartment, she finally spoke. "Tell me everything." I did. I told her about the forged signature, about Aaron's performance in my office, and about Detective Ward, who had looked at me with the quiet certainty of someone who already had the verdict written. When I finished, Harper was quiet for a long moment. "On my way to the station," she said carefully, "I stopped at a red light 2 blocks from your office. I saw Aaron in the parking lot behind the building. He was talking to Detective Ward." I stared at her. "They stopped the second they noticed my car," she said. Aaron put his phone away fast. Ward looked straight at me and didn't blink. She paused. "It wasn't a coincidence," she said. "The way they were standing, the way they both stopped at the same moment, it looked like they had been in the middle of something deliberate." Her voice dropped. "I think this was planned, Amelia. I hired a private attorney named Mr. Holt within 24 hours. He had handled financial fraud cases for decades. When I handed him the marriage contract Aaron and I had signed, he read it twice before setting it down. 'Did you read this carefully when you signed it?' he asked. I told him I had. Aaron had insisted on a prenuptial agreement to protect my inheritance. At the time, I had thought it was considerate. He had said he didn't want anyone accusing him of marrying me for money. Mr. Holt pointed to a section near the back. I had read it before, but the language had seemed standard. It was not standard. The clause stated that if I was ever found to be mentally unfit, or fiscally irresponsible by a licensed professional, control of my grandmother's inheritance would transfer to a designated trustee. Aaron was the designated trustee. Before I could fully absorb that, my phone rang. A psychiatrist's office. Aaron had scheduled me an emergency psychological evaluation without telling me. I arrived at the evaluation calm and prepared. Dr. Pauline Marsh had a quiet office with gray walls and no photographs. She asked careful questions and wrote careful notes. Aaron had arrived before me. He sat in the waiting room looking pale and frightened. When they called my name, he reached for my hand. "I'm just worried about you," he whispered. His eyes were wet. The session lasted 90 minutes. When it ended, Dr. Marsh walked me to the side door instead of the main exit. I thought she was being efficient. I was wrong. She looked over her shoulder before she spoke. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said quietly, "your husband came to my office 4 days ago. Alone. He brought a written list of symptoms he wanted me to look for during your evaluation. I said nothing. He also attached a copy of your prenuptial agreement to his email requesting the session," she continued. Her voice was flat and careful. "He rehearsed this," she said. "Whatever he told you about being worried, that was not what brought him here." She pressed her business card into my hand. I called Dr. Marsh the following morning. She had decided overnight that what she had witnessed was too serious to ignore. She sent me printed copies of Aaron's emails to her office, emails requesting the evaluation, describing my erratic behavior, and specifically asking her to prioritize the mental fitness assessment connected to the prenuptial clause. He had attached the contract himself. I sat at Harper's kitchen table and read every page twice. Dr. Marsh had added a handwritten note at the bottom. "He is doing this for something larger than money," she had written. "I don't know what it is, but please be careful." I thought about that note all the way home. That evening, while Aaron was on a call downstairs, I went into his home office and looked through his desk methodically. I checked each drawer. I turned over folders. I ran my hand along the underside of every shelf. In the bottom drawer, beneath a false panel at the base, I found it. A second phone. Thin. Black. No case. The screen lit up when I touched it. The second phone had no password. The messages went back more than 4 years, beginning just 2 months before Aaron had proposed to me. Most of them were between Aaron and a contact saved only as L. The tone was businesslike in a way that made my stomach drop. They discussed final steps, transfer windows, and getting her out of the way. One message said, "Once the evaluation clears, the trustee clause activates automatically. She won't even need to sign anything." Another read, "The sister account is ready. Keep her calm until the audit." I scrolled to the photo messages. There was one photograph, taken at what looked like a restaurant table. Aaron was laughing, his arm around a woman with short dark hair and sharp eyes. I knew that face. It was Leanne, Aaron's younger sister. The woman who had hugged me at our wedding and shared Christmas dinner at our table. The woman who had once called me her sister. Elle was Leanne, and she had been part of this from the very beginning. I drove to Leanne's apartment 2 days later. I had not told Aaron. I placed the phone back in the drawer exactly as I found it. Leanne answered the door in a bathrobe. When she saw me, something shifted behind her eyes. Not guilt. Something colder. "Amelia," she said and smiled. I told her calmly that I had found the phone, that I had read the messages. I watched her face the entire time. She didn't fall apart. She crossed her arms and tilted her head. "You were never really part of this family," she said quietly. "You were an opportunity. Aaron saw it the first night he met you." My mouth went dry. I made myself stay very still. "He was drowning in debt before you," she continued. "The plan was always to access the inheritance. You just made it easier than we expected." I had one question left. It had been burning inside me since I found the phone. Was our marriage even real? I asked. Leanne looked at me for a long moment. Then she closed the door. She never answered. She just closed the door. But Harper confirmed what I already suspected 4 days later. Her contact at the county clerk's office had pulled both versions of the marriage filing. The original contract had been filed correctly. But 3 weeks after our wedding, a second version had been submitted as a corrected filing. The property designation clause, the one meant to protect my assets, had been quietly replaced. The new language gave Aaron authority to act on my behalf if I was ever unavailable or incapacitated. Harper laid both documents side by side on the kitchen table. "He changed it while you were still on your honeymoon," she said. I stared at the pages without speaking. That same evening, going through a storage box of my grandmother's belongings I hadn't opened in 2 years, I found something at the very bottom beneath a bundle of old letters. A handwritten note in her careful script, dated 2 weeks before she died. It read, "Check Safety Deposit Box 114, Amelia. First National Bank. Do not wait." Box 114 had been registered in my grandmother's name. The bank confirmed I was listed as the secondary account holder, something I had completely forgotten. Inside the box were 2 items: a sealed envelope addressed to me in her handwriting, and a small USB drive taped to the bottom. The letter was 3 pages long. She wrote that she had met Aaron twice, once at a family dinner, and once when he visited her alone while I was away on a work trip. That second visit had alarmed her. He had asked detailed questions about how the inheritance was structured. "He does not love you," she had written. "Protect our legacy." The USB drive contained financial files, spreadsheets Aaron had apparently shown her during that visit as part of what he called a transparency conversation. She had photographed the screen on her tablet before he left. I opened the spreadsheets that evening at Harper's kitchen table and scrolled through page after page. Every transfer, every routing number, every destination account, all traced back to a single name: Leanne. For the first time since the handcuffs, I stopped crying. Something shifted inside me. Not anger exactly, but a kind of cold clarity. Quiet and absolute. I called a forensic accountant named Paul Graves using a prepaid phone. I gave him the USB files and the documents Harper had gathered and asked him to trace every transaction he could find. He called me back in 4 days. "Whoever did this is sophisticated," he said, "but not careful enough. The transfers follow a pattern, same routing sequence, same time windows, always initiated from a device registered to one address." He paused. "This is organized fraud, Mrs. Hartwell. Multi-year. Pre-planned." I asked him what I needed to do next. "I have to ask you something first," he said, "because the answer changes the strategy." I waited. "Do you want justice?" he asked. "Or do you want revenge?" I didn't hesitate. "Both," I said. "But justice first." A beat of silence. Then, "All right. Let's get to work." Paul and I worked quietly over the following weeks. I kept living with Aaron. I attended his family dinners. I smiled when he touched my shoulder and said nothing when he criticized my memory in front of his friends. Every night, I documented everything in a locked notebook stored at Harper's apartment. I noted every suspicious account alert, every time Aaron left the room for a phone call and came back looking too relaxed. I had installed a small recording device in the home office, legal in our state with one-party consent. I needed his voice, not just paper trails. Paul was building a financial map detailed enough to stand alone in a courtroom. Every dollar traced, every account identified, every forged signature compared against its original. Then, on an ordinary Thursday morning in October, Aaron received a piece of mail. He opened it at the kitchen table and went very still. He folded the paper before I could see it and walked upstairs without a word. But I already knew what it was. Paul had arranged it 6 weeks earlier. The IRS audit notice had finally arrived. Aaron said nothing to me about the audit. I only knew he had received it because I had watched his face at the kitchen table. That evening he came inside from a phone call in the driveway and walked straight to the office. I gave him 20 minutes before I appeared in the doorway carrying 2 cups of coffee. He looked up. His eyes were red at the edges. "Someone has been digging into accounts that are nobody's business," he said. His voice was shaking. "If you have said anything to anyone." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said calmly. He stood up. He was not quiet anymore. He said things that confirmed everything, referenced specific account numbers, named Leanne twice, and accused me of trying to destroy what took us years to build together. I kept my expression confused and hurt. I gave him nothing. The recording device in the bookcase caught every word, every number, every name. Every single thing he should never have said out loud. Paul confirmed the next piece of the puzzle on a Wednesday morning. He had traced a separate cluster of wire transfers, smaller amounts, different routing, to a business account registered to a woman named Stacy. She was listed as a junior account manager at Aaron's firm, hired 2 years before we married. Paul pulled her business registration records. The company was called Bright Line Consulting. It had no website, no visible clients, and no revenue outside of Aaron's direct transfers. He had funneled nearly $200,000 of my grandmother's money into her so-called startup. I sat with that information for 2 full days without saying a word to anyone. Then my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "I know you're Aaron's wife. I need to talk to you. I think we've both been used. Stacy." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed back, "When and where?" I told Harper immediately. She insisted on coming with me to meet her. I didn't argue. We met Stacy at a diner outside the city on a Thursday afternoon. She was younger than I expected, mid-20s, visibly nervous, and exhausted in the way that comes from carrying something heavy for too long. Aaron had told her our marriage was hollow, that I was mentally unstable, and the divorce was already in motion. He had promised to marry her once I was dealt with. His exact words, she said. Dealt with. He had described the plan to her in stages over nearly 2 years, how I would be found unfit, how the inheritance would transfer, how they would start a new life together somewhere else. But then I started asking questions about the money, Stacy said, about the timeline. And he began lying to me the same way I realized he had been lying to you all along. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were printed emails, Aaron's own words, laying out the plan to frame me for both fraud and fabricated adultery. "I kept copies of everything," she said quietly. "Take them." Paul called me the next morning with something that made me sit down on the kitchen floor. He had found a cluster of communications between Aaron and Detective Ward from the previous 3 weeks. Ward's personal email had been subpoenaed as part of the IRS investigation. A federal contact had flagged the relevant threads and passed them to Paul's team. Aaron wasn't just trying to protect himself from the audit. He had shifted to Plan B. The emails described a staged domestic violence incident. Aaron would provoke a confrontation at home, claim I attacked him, and have Ward respond to the call personally. With my existing arrest record from the embezzlement charge, a second offense would almost certainly result in detention, long enough for the trustee clause to activate automatically. Paul read me one line directly. "Once she's detained for 72 hours, the transfer is automatic." I was sitting in our kitchen when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. 3 words. "Tonight. We finished this." The message had been meant for someone else. It had reached me instead. I had 4 hours. I called Harper first, then Paul, then Mr. Holt. Paul reached his federal contact immediately. Mr. Holt arranged for 2 licensed witnesses to arrive at the house within the hour. Harper came herself and set up a recording device in the living room while I placed 2 more in the hallway and the kitchen. We had timestamps. We had witnesses in the next room. Documentation of the staged plan was already in federal hands before Aaron walked through the door. Aaron arrived home at 10:15. He smelled of alcohol and moved like someone who had spent hours building up the nerve for something. He knocked a chair over in the kitchen. He stood in the living room doorway and said things designed to make me react. I sat on the couch with my hands in my lap. I kept my voice low and even. I gave him nothing to work with. At 10:47, blue and red lights swept across the front windows. Police cars pulled into the driveway, responding to Mr. Holt's call. Not Aaron's. The officers arrested Aaron in our front hallway at 10:52. He didn't understand what was happening at first. He kept insisting he was the one who had called, that he was the victim, that his wife had threatened him. One officer told him calmly that he was being detained on charges of fraud, coercion, filing false reports, and criminal conspiracy. Aaron went pale. His mother arrived 20 minutes later, screaming from the lawn that I had manipulated everything, that I had always been the problem, that her son had been set up. A second car arrived for Detective Ward. He was taken from his apartment across town at the very same time. The federal involvement had moved faster than any of us expected. Paul had sent me a message earlier that day. The IRS referral triggered a wider investigation. Ward has been under watch for months. I stood on my porch and watched Aaron's mother sob into her hands. I felt no satisfaction. Not yet. What I felt was relief, raw, quiet, and completely overwhelming. The trial lasted 7 months. Aaron hired 3 different attorneys. Each one eventually faced the same wall of evidence: financial records, recorded conversations, Stacy's testimony, Dr. Marsh's documentation, the federal audit trail, and my grandmother's USB files. Aaron cried in court. He told the judge I had always been troubled, that he had only tried to protect me, that the accounts were the result of decisions we had made together. The judge was not moved. I presented everything in order: the forged signatures, the prenup clause, the second phone messages, the staged psychiatric evaluation, the recorded meltdown in the home office, the federal emails outlining the planned domestic incident. When I finished, the courtroom was completely silent. The judge issued an immediate restraining order against Aaron and held him without bail pending sentencing. As I walked out of the courtroom, I did not look back at him. I had spent 4 years looking at a man who was never really there. I was done. Sentencing came 8 weeks after the verdict. Aaron received 6 years. Leanne received 4. Detective Ward was convicted separately on federal corruption charges. Mr. Holt filed to have my embezzlement charge formally vacated. The judge granted it in under 10 minutes. Hartwell Creative was restored to my name. The frozen accounts were returned through civil proceedings. My grandmother's inheritance, what remained of it, came back through a court order that turned Aaron's own fraudulent prenup clause completely against him. I reopened my office on a Monday morning in April. 2 of my original employees returned the first week. Others followed over the months after. I thought the story was finally over. Then, 3 months after sentencing, Aaron's prison physician contacted Mr. Holt's office directly. Aaron had been diagnosed with a serious cardiac condition. It had advanced rapidly. He was being transferred to a medical care facility outside the prison system. The following week, a formal letter arrived from his attorney. Aaron was requesting a visit from me. I did not visit him. I sent a single line back through Mr. Holt. No. I did not explain. He didn't deserve one. 6 weeks later, a second letter arrived. This one directly from Aaron's attorney. It was formal and brief. Aaron had drafted a final written statement with a notary present and a supervising attorney from a separate firm overseeing the process. He had named me specifically as the only person authorized to read the statement aloud at his funeral. The request was legally attached to his estate arrangements. If I refused, the statement would be permanently sealed and his estate would bypass everyone, Leanne, his mother, all of them, and pass to a distant relative. Mr. Holt told me I had no legal obligation to honor the request. I knew that. But I also knew Aaron had spent 4 years controlling my story. This could easily be one final move, pulling me back into his orbit on his terms, even from a hospice bed. I sat with the letter for 3 days without touching it. Aaron died on a Tuesday. His attorney called at 8 in the morning. Professional and brief. The funeral was scheduled for the following Saturday. The notarized statement was available for collection. I drove to the attorney's office that afternoon and sat across a white oak desk while he slid a sealed envelope toward me. He explained that the document had been prepared with 2 witnesses, a licensed notary, and independent legal oversight from a separate firm. He was clear-headed when he wrote it, the attorney said carefully. Whatever you choose to do with it is entirely your decision. I opened the envelope alone in my car. I read it twice slowly. Aaron had written it all down. Every lie. Every step of the plan. Every moment he had deliberately dismantled a piece of my life. He had signed it and initialed each page. He had not made excuses. He had not asked to be forgiven. He had simply told the truth, something he had never once done while he was alive. I sat in that parking lot for a long time before I started the drive home. The church was full on Saturday. I took my seat in the front pew and waited until the pastor gestured me forward. I carried the envelope to the pulpit. I didn't need to read from the pages, I had memorized every line, but I held them because they were real and I needed the room to see that they were real. I began to read slowly and clearly. The first 2 paragraphs were enough to shift the atmosphere. I heard the soft sounds of people adjusting in their seats, confusion sharpening into something louder and less comfortable. By the third paragraph, Aaron's mother was on her feet. She moved into the aisle before the usher stepped forward to gently redirect her. She was reaching toward me with both hands open. She wanted the pages. I kept reading. I did not stop. I did not raise my voice. I simply continued, every lie, every account number, every forged name, until I reached the final sentence and read it aloud. Then I folded the pages slowly and carefully back into the envelope. The room was completely silent. I walked out of the church into the October sunlight. Harper was waiting on the steps. She handed me coffee and stood quietly beside me while the noise inside slowly settled into something lower and uncertain. I had spent 4 years living inside Aaron's version of my life. He took my company, my reputation, my grandmother's legacy, and years I would never get back. He stood in courtrooms and cried convincing tears. He told people I was broken. But at the end, he had written every lie down himself, signed each page, notarized it, and chose me, specifically me, to read it aloud to the people who had believed him most. 6 weeks after the funeral, I established the Ruth Hartwell Foundation to support survivors of financial and emotional abuse. The first donation came from Aaron's civil settlement. He stole years from my life. Without meaning to, he gave me a purpose I would never have found alone. I walked down those steps and did not look back. Aaron spent his whole life trying to bury me. In the end, the only thing buried was his legacy, and I made sure of it.